Member Week is on at Lowe's. Get up to 40% off hundreds of items like appliances, home essentials, decor, and more. Perfect for your January reset. Plus, earn 5 times the points on an eligible purchase. Shop member deals in-store and online from January 8th to the 14th. Still not a member? Join for free today. Lowe's. We help, you save. Point boosters subject to exclusions and more terms apply. Loyalty program subject to terms and conditions. Visit Lowe's.com/terms for details. Subject to change.
And welcome again to the Explaining History podcast. And this is my sort of second week of trying to improve the sound quality on the podcast. I know it's been an amateur hour for many a year, and I'm sort of working on that a little bit now. There's a bit of bandwidth to do that. Okay, so before we get started, just to let you know a couple of things. Firstly, that the podcast is available now, advert-free, via Patreon. There's a link in the show notes that you can access if you want to join us. And I do a few extra little things on Patreon as well. We'll be doing a couple more little video things too. So, little piece of camera in the moment sort of things when the mood takes me. Secondly, if you're studying Russian history, for your A levels, or for your for any other qualification, we're doing a special in a fortnight on Sunday, 2 weeks time, Sunday the 25th, I think it is. Yep, that's right. Sunday the 25th, we're going to be doing a study special together. So it's going to be on the Russian Revolution and the Stalin era. It'll be a full 90 minutes of writing and exam techniques. I'm not so much looking to rehash over endless knowledge, because that's kind of accessible. But we're looking at really what we do with that knowledge, how we apply it, how we structure it, how we make meaning from it, how we make argument from it. Because exams are not so much about knowing, but about arguing, and it's about organising information into a meaningful process of argument. And we'll also be looking at what the examiner is looking for, and a little bit of the inner game, how you build your self-confidence, because exams are won and lost very often on that. So, anyway, those are the housekeeping announcements. And so let's dive in now, and we're going to look at Eugene Rogan's brilliant book again, The Fall of the Ottomans, and about what happened after the initial constitutional revolution by the CUP, the Committee of Union and Progress. And really this is kind of a bit of a parable about revolutionary expectations and disappointment, and what that leads to. Okay, So in the previous episode, there had been and when we talked about this, there had been a revolt against Sultan Abdulhamid's repressive system, and yet he sometimes somehow manages to survive this revolution, if we can call it that. So, Eugene Rogan writes, yet the revolution that raised so many hopes led only to disillusionment. Those who had hoped for political transformation were disappointed when the revolution produced no major changes in the government of the Ottoman Empire. The CUP decided to leave Sultan Abdulhamid II on the throne. He had managed to take some credit for the restoration of the constitution and was revered by the Ottoman masses as both their sultan and the caliph or spiritual head of the Muslim world. Deposing Abdulhamid might have generated more problems than benefits for the Young Turks in 1908. Moreover, the CUP's leaders were indeed Young Turks, most junior officers and low-ranking bureaucrats in their late 20s and 30s. They lacked the confidence to take power into their own hands. Instead, they left the exercise of government to the Grand Vizier, or Prime Minister, Said Pasha, and his cabinet, and took on the role of oversight committee to ensure the Sultan and his government upheld the constitution. If Ottoman citizens believed the constitution would solve their economic problems, they were soon to be disappointed. The political instability provoked by the revolution undermined confidence in the Turkish currency. Inflation soared to 20% in August and September 1908, putting the working classes under intense pressure. Ottoman workers organised demonstrations seeking better pay and working conditions, but the treasury was in no position to meet the workers' legitimate demands. Labour activists mounted over 100 strikes in the first 6 months after the revolution, leading to severe laws and a government crackdown on workers. Crucially, those who believed the return to parliamentary democracy would gain Europe's support and respect for the territorial integrity of the Ottoman Empire were to be humiliated. Turkey's European neighbours seized on the instability created by the Young Turk Revolution to annex yet more Ottoman territory. On the 5th of October 1908, the former Ottoman province of Bulgaria declared its independence. The following day, the Austro-Hungarian Habsburg Empire announced the annexation of the autonomous Ottoman provinces of Bosnia-Herzegovina. On the 6th of October, Crete announced its union with Greece. Turkey's democratic turn had not won it more support from the European powers and instead rendered the empire more vulnerable. The Young Turks sought to regain control over the revolution through the Ottoman Parliament. The CUP was one of the only two parties to contest the election, held late in November and early December 1908, and the Unionists, as many members of the CUP were called, won an overwhelming majority in the lower house, co-opting many independents into CUP ranks. On the 17th of December, the Sultan opened the first session of Parliament with a speech that asserted his commitment to the constitution. The leaders of both the elected and lower chamber and the appointed upper chamber replied to the Sultan's speech, praising Abdulhamid for the wisdom he showed in restoring constitutional government. The exchange created the illusion of harmony between the Sultan and the CUP. Yet absolute monarchs do not change overnight, and Abdulhamid, unreconciled to constitutional constraints on his powers or parliamentary scrutiny, bided his time for the first opportunity to dispense with the Young Turks. This has echoes of Nicholas II after 1905. Nicholas II after 1905, the Tsar of Russia, an absolute monarch, who had no recognition, was almost kind of himself internally and mentally incapable of recognizing the diminution in autocratic power. He was unable to kind of read the historical moment that he was in, and believed that um, 1905, the kind of the October Manifesto of 1905 had been almost a kind of a betrayal of the divine authority placed in him by, as he believed, God, and sought to kind of undermine it. Um, and with sort of some fairly fatal consequences later on. Not only did the way in which he sort of sabotaged the Duma mean that progressive voices, uh, as in the run up to the war, were marginalised, and the Duma swings far to the right and becomes far more reactionary and almost kind of in some cases like proto-fascist in some with some of the kind of the Duma bodies parties emerging. Um, and when it comes to moderation on the eve of the war, the Tsar hasn't got a kind of a political grouping behind him that is kind of capable really of articulating that. And it uh, reminds the workers in the Petrograd Soviet after 1917 that there's no compromising with the the kind of the remnants of the autocracy. So yeah, and as it says here, there was going to be no real compromise from Abdulhamid. Once the enthusiasm for revolution had abated, as it inevitably does, the CUP came to face serious opposition within Ottoman political circles from the influential elements of civil society. The religion of state was Islam, and the religious establishment condemned what they saw as the secular culture of the Young Turks. Within the military, there were clear splits between officers who were graduates of the military academies and had liberal reformist leanings. This is where you get your Kemal Ataturks, for example, and ordinary soldiers who placed a higher premium on on the loyalty they had pledged to the Sultan. Within the parliament, the members of the liberal faction suspected the CUP of authoritarian tendencies and used their access to the press and to European officials, particularly in the British Embassy, to undermine the CUP position and in the lower chamber. But from his palace, Abdulhamid II quietly encouraged all elements that challenged the CUP. On the night of the 12th to the 13th of April 1909, the enemies of the CUP mounted a counter-revolution. Soldiers of the First Army Corps, loyal to the Sultan Abdulhamid, mutinied against their officers and made common cause with religious scholars from the capital's theological colleges. Together they marched on Parliament in a noisy demonstration that drew growing numbers of Islamic scholars and mutinous soldiers overnight. They demanded a new cabinet, banishment of a number of unionist politicians, and restoration of Islamic law, even though the country had been in fact under a mixed set of legal codes for decades. The unionist deputies fled the capital, fearing for their lives. The cabinet tendered its resignation, and the Sultan opportunistically conceded to the demands of the mob, reasserting his control over the politics of the Ottoman Empire. Abdulhamid's restoration proved short-lived. The Ottoman Third Army in Macedonia saw the counter-revolution in Istanbul as an assault on the constitution they believed essential for the empire's political future. Young Turk loyalists in Macedonia mobilized a campaign force called the Action Army to march to Istanbul under the command of Major Ahmed Niazi, a hero of the Young Turk Revolution. This relief force set out from Salonika for the imperial capital on the 17th of April. In the early morning of the 24th of April, the Action Army occupied Istanbul, suppressed the revolt with little opposition, and imposed martial law. The two chambers of the Ottoman Parliament reconvened as the General National Assembly on the 27th of April voted to depose Sultan Abdulhamid II and install his younger brother Mehmed Rezad as Sultan Mehmed V.
This is Paige DeSorbo from Giggly Squad. Boost Mobile gives you the same network coverage, speed, and service you're used to, just at a more affordable price. Why pay more if you don't have to? Offering reliable nationwide coverage backed by a 30-day money-back guarantee. Love your service or get your money back, no questions asked. Visit your nearest Boost Mobile store or head to boostmobile.com to learn more. After 30 gigabytes, customers may experience slower speeds. Customers who cancel within 30 days of activation will have Boost service fees refunded. Activation fees, if applicable, and phone payments will not be refunded.
Member Week is on at Lowe's. Get up to 40% off hundreds of items like appliances, home essentials, decor, and more. Perfect for your January reset. Plus, earn 5 times the points on an eligible purchase. Shop member deals in-store and online from January 8th to the 14th. Still not a member? Join for free today. Lowe's. We help, you save. Point boosters subject to exclusions and more terms apply. Loyalty program subject to terms and conditions. Visit Lowe's.com/terms for details. Subject to change.
With the return of the CUP to power, the counter-revolution was decisively defeated, all within 2 weeks. So you've got these really interesting kind of paradoxes. Firstly, you have a kind of a demographic tier within Ottoman society of relatively secular, though not completely, relatively secular and Western-looking army officers, bureaucrats, writers, lawyers, intellectuals, that sort of kind of sort of Islamic, Turkish bourgeoisie, or Ottoman bourgeoisie, shall we say, who could see the writing on the wall for the empire, and he thought, well, unless there is reform and probably elements of self-rule and reform of the empire's institutions, the army, the bureaucracy, and the sultanate, then we're just going to lose territory after territory, and eventually Turkey itself will be dismembered, and that's what the British, the French, the Russians, the Italians, everybody is waiting to do. And we will end up the way the rest of Asia has essentially ended up. And so this was a kind of liberal civic nationalism. The likes of which you see in Japan during the Meiji Restoration, the Japanese military and key figures in the nobility looked to China and thought that that's the cautionary tale here. We don't want that. We must avoid that at all costs. And the Ottomans were surrounded with examples of what happened to countries that were too weak to defend themselves. And then you have this absolutist in the guise of Abdulhamid, who sees any diminution in his power as some kind of fundamental breach with the past, and some deep kind of grievous insult, and some kind of failing of his. Once again, his, just like the Tsar of Russia, he viewed absolute power as being a kind of a sacred duty. And you have the need for there is a counter-revolution of the clergy, of Islamic scholars, and lower ranking army officers, junior officers, and NCOs and private soldiers. Actually, it's mainly the NCOs and the private soldiers wanting to restore absolute power. And then you have to have essentially a military coup to establish kind of constitutionalism. It's sort of kind of slightly kind of Cromwell-esque sort of Pride's Purge things happening here. So there is some really, really interesting dynamics there, but it's all the product of imperial decline. And when the kind of the writing is on the wall for an empire, it's normally that you see these intense and fierce debates from within the metropole about what that decline spells, how it's arrested, how it's reversed, or what is left that can be preserved. So, Eugene Rogan writes, the counter-revolution exposed deep divisions within Ottoman society, none more dangerous than the Turkish-Armenian antagonism. Immediately after the Action Army restored the CUP to power in Istanbul, Muslim crowds massacred thousands of Armenians in the southeastern city of Adana. The roots of this pogrom dated back to the 1870s. In the course of the First World War, that hostility would metastasize into the first genocide of the 20th century. In 1909, many Ottoman Turks suspected the Armenians of being a minority community with a nationalist agenda, intent on seceding from the empire. Comprising a distinct ethnic group with its own language and Christian liturgy and centuries of communal organization under the Ottomans as a distinct millet or faith community, the Armenians had all of the prerequisites for a 19th century nationalist movement bar one. They were not concentrated in a geographical area. As a people, they were dispersed between the Russian and the Ottoman empires, and within Ottoman domains across eastern Anatolia and Mediterranean coastal regions, and main trading cities of the empire. The largest concentration of Armenians resided in the capital, Istanbul. Without a critical mass in one geographical location, the Armenians could never hope to achieve statehood, unless, of course, they could secure the support of a great power for their cause. The Armenians made the first territorial claim at the 1878 Congress of Berlin. This is the Congress of Berlin that settles the Russo-Turkish War, not the later Congress or the Berlin Conference, which sees the dismemberment of Africa. Common mistake there. As part of the settlement of the Russo-Turkish War, the Ottomans were forced to cede 3 provinces with sizable Armenian populations to Russia: Kars, Ardahan, and Batum. The transfer of hundreds of thousands of Armenians to Russian rule provided the context for Armenian demands for greater autonomy within the Ottoman domains. The Armenian delegation set out their ambitions, claiming the Ottoman provinces of Erzurum, Bitlis, and Van were the provinces inhabited by the Armenians. The delegation sought an autonomous region under a Christian governor on the model of Mount Lebanon, with its volatile mix of Christian and Muslim communities. The European powers responded by including an article in the Treaty of Berlin requiring the Ottoman government to implement immediately such improvements and reforms demanded by local requirements in the provinces inhabited by the Armenians, and to provide them with the security from attack by the Muslim majority. The treaty required Istanbul to report periodically to the European powers on the measures it was taking on behalf of its Armenian citizens. And the reason why all this was possible is because a degree of kind of extraterritoriality was now enforceable. The same that had been enforced on China, but was now enforceable in the Ottoman Empire. Western powers could intervene in Ottoman affairs with impunity, and could police the inner workings of the Ottoman Empire if they saw fit. And the reason why this is possible is because it's been demonstrated several times throughout the 19th century that the Ottomans aren't capable of fighting the Russians or the British or whoever else it's likely to be. European support for Christian nationalist movements in the Balkans had made the Ottomans understandably wary of foreign intentions in other strategic Ottoman domains. The new status accorded by the Treaty of Berlin to Armenian communal aspirations in the Turkish heartlands of Anatolia posed a distinct threat to the Ottoman Empire. Having just surrendered the three provinces of Kars, Ardahan, and Batum to Russia as a war indemnity, the Ottomans could not contemplate ceding further territory in eastern Anatolia. Consequently, Abdulhamid II's government did all it could to suppress the nascent Armenian movement and its ties to Britain and Russia. When in the late 1880s Armenian activists began to form political organizations to pursue their nationalist aspirations, the Ottoman government treated them like any other domestic opposition group and responded with a full range of repressive action, surveillance, arrest, imprisonment, and exile. Two distinct Armenian nationalist societies emerged at the end of the 19th century. A group of Armenian students in Switzerland and France called the Hunchak, or Armenian for Bell, Society in Geneva in 1887. In 1890, a group of activists inside the Russian Empire launched the Armenian Revolutionary Federation, better known as Dashnak, short for Dashnak Sultan, or Federation in Armenian. These were very different movements with divergent ideologies and methods. The Hunchaks debated the relative merits of socialism and national liberation, while the Dashnaks promoted self-defense among Armenian communities in both Russia and the Ottoman Empire. Both societies espoused the use of violence to achieve Armenian political aims. They saw themselves as freedom fighters, but the Ottomans branded them terrorists. Activities by the Hunchaks and the Dashnaks exacerbated tensions between Muslims and Christians in eastern Anatolia, which the Armenian activists hoped might provoke European intervention, and the Ottomans exploited to try to quell what they saw as a nascent nationalist movement. The volatile situation led inevitably to bloodshed. Between 1894 and 1896, Ottoman Armenians were the target of a series of terrible massacres. The violence between the Sasan region of southeastern Anatolia in the summer of 1894, when Kurdish nomads attacked Armenian villagers for refusing to make the traditional protection payments on top of their tax payments to Ottoman officials. The Armenian activists took up the cause of the overtaxed Armenian peasants and encouraged their revolt. British traveller and businessman H.F.B. Lynch, who journeyed through the Sasan region on the eve of the massacres, described the Armenian agitators. The object of these men is to keep the Armenian cause alive by lighting a flame here and there and calling fire. The cry is taken up by the European press, and when the people run to look, they are sure to be some Turkish officials drawn into the trap and committing abominations. The Ottoman government dispatched the Fourth Army, reinforced by a Kurdish cavalry regiment, to restore order. Thousands of Armenians were killed as a result, provoking the European calls for intervention that the Hunchaks actively sought and the Ottomans most wanted to avoid. In September 1895, the Hunchaks organized a march in Istanbul to petition for reforms in the Eastern Anatolian provinces that Europeans increasingly referred to as Turkish Armenia. They gave both the Ottoman government and all foreign embassies 48 hours advance notice and set out their demands, including the appointment of a Christian governor general to oversee reforms in eastern Anatolia, and the right of Armenian villagers to bear arms and protect themselves against the well-armed Kurdish neighbours. The Ottomans surrounded the Sublime Porte, the walled compound housing the offices of the Ottoman Prime Minister and his cabinet. The term is also used to refer to the Ottoman government in the same way that Whitehall is used for the British government. With a police cordon to drive back the crowd of Armenian protesters, a policeman was killed in the melee, setting off a riot in which a hostile Muslim crowd turned on the Armenians. 60 protesters were killed outside the port alone. The European powers protesting the killing of peaceful demonstrators. Faced with mounting international pressure, Sultan Abdulhamid issued a decree of the 17th of October promising reforms in the 6 provinces of eastern Anatolia with Armenian populations: Erzurum, Van, Bitlis, Diyarbakir, Harput and Sivas. The Sultan's reform decree served only to heighten the fears of the Ottoman Muslims in the 6 provinces. They saw the measure as a prelude to Armenian independence in eastern Anatolia, which would force the Muslim majority either to live under Christian authority or to abandon their homes and villages and resettle in Muslim lands, as thousands of Muslims from Crimea, the Caucasus, and the Balkans had already been forced to do when the Ottomans had relinquished those lands to Christian rule. Ottoman officials did little to dispel these fears, and within days of the Sultan's decree, a new and far more lethal wave of massacres swept the towns and the villages of central and eastern Anatolia. By February 1896, American missionaries estimated that no fewer than 37,000 Armenians had been killed and 300,000 left homeless. Other estimates put the casualty figures between 100,000 and 300,000 Armenian dead and wounded. Given the isolated nature of the region, we're unlikely to obtain more precise figures for the casualties of the 1895 massacres. Yet the level of violence against the Armenians was clearly unprecedented in Ottoman history. So this gives you a sense of the kind of the fears and the crises following the restoration of CUP power after 1908. There are some interesting things there. Firstly, the fears of partitioning of the Ottoman Empire, creating a Christian Armenia, and the kind of the direct parallels with the partition of India, of certain groups not wanting to live under others for fear of becoming second-class citizens or persecuted, and then the kind of the mass kind of population movements that involves. But secondly, it's really interesting to look at the European interference in the Ottoman Empire and look at that as a kind of like a precursor to European interference in the Muslim world, from essentially from Morocco to Jakarta in the 20th century, and the kind of the violence that has led to, and say European and American, obviously, and the interest in partition, in using ethnic and religious tensions against one another to create instability and crisis. I mean, the permanent crisis. It's almost as if European colonialists in the 20th century learned every trick in the book from their 19th century forebears, not least in their interference within the Ottoman Empire, but in other parts of the world as well. This isn't to paint the sultans of the Ottoman Empire or the CUP as kind of naive ingenues, the sort of the poor victims of white European colonialists, because they're certainly far more than that. When you eventually, as we read through the fall of the Ottomans and a few other things that I've got in mind, when we look at the Armenian genocide, truly monstrous individuals, many of them in their own right, and yet the tensions created by European and Russian predation upon the Ottoman Empire goes a long way to explaining great explosions of violence as the empire went into decline during and after the First World War. Okay, so I'll be doing something a little bit later on. I'll be posting something UK time quite late tonight on a couple of things to do with America. What tends to happen at the moment, my reading of my stats, is that US listeners tend to catch things when it's like 11 p.m. here. So I always time something. I'm going to try to time something so that there's new content for US listeners to pick up on. It's a really frightening time at the moment, not just in America, but pretty much everywhere else. And I want this podcast to be of some help to place what's happening in some kind of meaningful context. So look out later on, and there'll be something for everybody to listen, but it's there to kind of catch US audiences when they are having their coffee. So yeah, anyway. Catch you later. Hope that was a useful one for you, and stay safe. All the best. Bye-bye.
In postseason football, you need to find that extra gear. On FanDuel, it's called Playoff Mode. Big boosts, more rewards, and a whole new way to live parlay with Drive SGP. Turn on Playoff Mode, only on FanDuel.
New customers bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. 21 plus and present in select states. First online real money wager only. $5 deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets which expire 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See full terms at FanDuel.com/sportsbook. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit rg-help.com.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Explaining History. This podcast is an independent production, and it's listener support that keeps these conversations going week after week. If you find value in the show and want to help cover the costs of research and production, please consider making a contribution. You can join our community on Patreon or make a one-off donation. Just follow the links in the show notes for this episode. Every bit of support is truly appreciated. Thanks again for listening.